It is not how much you make, how much you keep and grow. Master CEO's Secrets of Australia's Leading CEOs makes that unforgettable. We will focus on what it says about people and time. Stay with me, the best part is near the end. Chapter 1, Go Jerry, Go, Go, Go. Conclusion Index Chapter 1 Selecting the Master CEOs. The selection process for the Master CEOs was kept quite simple. There were 4 key criteria. The CEO or managing director must have been in charge of the company for a minimum of 10 years. The minimum tenure was based on a desire to, as best as possible, eliminate the benefit or detriment of an economic cycle. That is, we wanted the CEOs to have performed through good and bad times. The average term of CEOs in listed companies is closer to 5 years. The CEO had to be still actively running the company at the time we invited them to participate in the book. The company must have been listed on the Australian Securities Exchange for at least the 10 years the CEO was in charge. There were many companies whose CEO had been there for many years before listing, but these companies could not be considered because they had been listed for less than 10 years. The company's total return to its shareholders must have outperformed the All Ordinaries Accumulation Index over the period the CEO was in charge. The All Ordinaries Accumulation Index measures the overall performance of the Australian share market, including dividends, so we thought it was the best benchmark to work from. We applied the criteria to the companies in the All Ordinaries Accumulation Index and more than 20 CEOs qualified. Letters were sent to these people and 13 accepted. This was a tremendous response, given the time constraints and obligations of the people involved. We accept that the list of CEOs is not exhaustive, however, it contains a variety of people from different industries and backgrounds, and all have inspiring stories to tell. Selection processes are often contentious, whether they are for the best teams in sport or the top musicians of an era, and our selection process will not suit everyone. 3 of the CEOs retired after being interviewed: David Simmons of Hills Industries, Pat Greer of Ramsay Health Care and Owen Hegarty of Oxiana. It was decided that all 3 should stay in the book, given they had a lot to offer and that they had already been involved in the process. Each of the 13 CEOs was interviewed directly by the authors. The intention was to have them tell their life story and at the same time explain why they have been such outstanding leaders in corporate life. Most of the interviews begin with the CEO's childhood and rise to the top, before switching to the subject of leadership and management. These leaders are from a range of sectors, with healthcare the dominant industry, providing 4 of the 13 people. The remainder are from industries including banking, retail, construction, grocery wholesaling, transport, mining services and diversified industry. Interestingly, they also come from a good cross-section of the country, with 6 from New South Wales, 3 from Victoria, 2 from Queensland, 1 from South Australia and 1 from Western Australia. 9 grew up in Australia, 2 in South Africa, 1 in Zimbabwe and 1 in Italy. Of significance was that only one of the CEOs was brought in from overseas to run a company. That person was Andrew Wrightseer, who was placed in the top job at food and liquor wholesaler Metcash after his South African employer made a takeover bid for the company. The rest had learned their management skills in Australia, a fact not wasted on Leighton Holdings CEO Wal King, who had some strong comments about the conduct of Australian boards and the selection of management. Unfortunately, no female CEOs passed the selection criteria. The one exception was Katie Page, who along with her husband, Jerry Harvey, has run the highly successful Harvey Norman Retail Group for 25 years. We were hopeful that Katie and Jerry could be interviewed together, but she preferred not to be involved, leaving Jerry to do the talking. There were a number of objectives in writing this book. Firstly, we were keen to look beyond the numbers and investigate how some leaders manage to continually perform highly. All too often analysts and funds managers are only concerned with the end result, rather than with why some managers have the ability to deliver outstanding results over long periods. Sustainable businesses are difficult to find, and when we do come across them, it is incumbent on investors, managers, and employees to study why they have delivered great outcomes. Secondly, the subject of leadership has been much researched in other Western markets, such as the United States and United Kingdom, and is a much debated topic in other fields, such as politics and sport. However, leadership in Australian companies has been explored very little. Finally, as students of business and life, we are excited by the subject of success. The 13 CEOs we interviewed for this book have enjoyed outstanding success in their chosen careers. Tapping into their thoughts was an exercise worth doing even if we had not been writing a book. Overleaf sets out the returns the 13 master CEOs have presided over at their companies. While the returns vary greatly, we believe each leader has done an outstanding job for their investors, given the time frame and the industry they are in. The returns are based on when the individuals became CEO until we started interviewing them in February 2008. Company returns. We look forward to writing a sequel to Master CEOs. While it would be difficult to come up with a long list of names today, or even in a year's time, we are confident there are many new corporate leaders who will qualify in the future. People such as John Grill from Worley Parsons, Mark McInnes from David Jones, Reg Kermode from Cabcharge, and Peter Denai from Iris will easily qualify in the next few years if they stay where they are and continue to perform. Even at the smaller end of the market, people such as Theo Narakis from Melbourne IT and Clive Raby from Reckon are in line to join the list. We found that many of the CEOs interviewed shared many similar traits, even though they all have very different personalities. While there is no one way to run a business successfully, we found that there are some crucial components that go into making a great leader. After the AMA saga, I thought, whatever they do to me, I can survive it. From that point on, I wanted to be my own self, and I didn't want the world to be chasing me and sticking pins in me. If I can put up with that, I can put up with anything people throw at me. Dr. Edmund Bateman Primary Healthcare operates the largest medical center business in Australia, with 40 sites around the country. The centers provide access to general practitioners, specialists, pharmacy, pathology, radiology, occupational therapy, and paramedical services. Following the takeover of Symbion Health, Primary also operates significant standalone pathology and radiology businesses. The company reported a net profit of $1 million for the 2007-08 financial year. Investors have received a return of 638% during Drive Edmund Bateman's time as CEO, between 1998 and 2008, compared with a 207% return by the All Ordinaries Accumulation Index. Chapter 2: People and Medical. Tough Medicine. Dr. Edmund Bateman. Dr. Edmund Bateman is a colossus in the Australian medical industry. In many ways he is to medical business what Kerry Packer was to the media industry in the 1970s and 1980s. Like Packer, Dr. Bateman has a hard exterior and a reputation for being tough and uncompromising, yet charming. It takes a game person to go into battle with the doctor. Dr. Bateman's sons describe their father's leadership style as his way or the highway, and while their father laughs at this suggestion, there is little confusion about who is in charge at the stunningly successful medical company, Primary Health Care. In many ways Dr. Bateman is a visionary. Under his leadership, Primary has changed the way medicine is practiced in Australia. This change has not come easy, with many of the medical fraternity stinging in their criticism of Dr. Bateman and his style. However, the public have voted with their feet, beating a path to Primary's string of medical centers across the country. Virtually every GP in Dr. Bateman's hometown of Sydney has a story about him and his no-nonsense style of implementing the company's business plan. The investment community has applauded his direct style and his ability to deliver returns. After watching the doctor give a presentation some years back, one cheeky Sydney funds manager nicknamed him Dr. Evil, after the character in the Mike Myers Austin Powers films. Dr. Bateman is a stern-looking man who, on the face of it, has little time for people who ask impertinent questions and who have the temerity to question his decision-making. Dr. Bateman shares a number of other Packer traits. While Packer liked to gamble at casinos around the globe, Dr. Bateman has shown a willingness to bet all on his business ventures. Whether it is his farming ventures, revolutionary medical clinics, personal investing or recent successful bid to buy the much larger Symbion Health, Dr. Bateman has a propensity to take enormous risks. In our interview, many of these characteristics were not on show, and it became clear that his reputation as a businessman in a steel suit is more fiction than reality. Dr. Bateman comes across as an extremely honest and affable person, and it was a pleasure to be in his company. He reveals his childhood and the lasting impact it has had on him. He also talks at length about his fear of failing and letting his many shareholders, doctors, and employees down. There have been many times when Dr. Bateman would have been happy to be a farmer in rural New South Wales, but due to fate and his insatiable appetite to take risks, he has pushed on and now believes he will rest only when buried. His flirtations with financial ruin have numbered many over the years, and his willingness to take each threatening situation head-on, despite fearing a disastrous outcome, is inspiring. In short, Dr. Bateman has revolutionized the age-old profession of general practice medicine in Australia. He has scoffed at his critics among the medical profession and believes that his way is the only way that can survive in the current environment, and the only way that can sufficiently support the longevity of the GP. Primary Healthcare began its corporate life in the 1980s with the opening of the Warringah Mall Medical Centre on Sydney's northern beaches. While the centre and its support of bulk billing have attracted significant criticism over the years from the medical community, the company has grown to a behemoth with 40 centres scattered around the country. In 2007, Primary posted revenue of more than $160 million and earnings of more than $82 million. An immense effort, given most ventures to corporatize general medical practices in Australia have failed. Dr. Bateman has become extremely rich on the back of this success, with his personal fortune soaring to over $300 million. Despite this, he reviles flashy lifestyles and works extremely hard to keep a low profile. The Primary Healthcare annual report has no pictures of directors, virtually no commentary on the people or the business, and the document only qualifies as an annual report because it includes the financial numbers and corporate governance documents. We met Dr. Bateman in March 2008. He was jovial and warm, and on a high after defeating arch-rival Healthscope in the battle to take over the $1 billion medical group, Symbion. The attempt to gain control of the pathology and radiology group raged for many months, with Primary winning despite offering a lower bid than Healthscope. It was typical Bateman brinkmanship. He was prepared to roll the dice and put more than 20 years of work at risk to take the company into a new era. All this at 66 years of age and having previously held fleeting thoughts of retirement. Dr. Bateman remains determined to prove to all and sundry that he can make it work and stick it to the non-believers, something he has been able to achieve most of his life. Where were you born and where did you go to school? I was born in Sydney. I went to St. Aloysius College. My father was a doctor and my mother was a barrister. It was a family of 7 kids. I spent my whole life in Sydney. My first 16 years were about school and sport. More sport than school. Did you enjoy your sport? At school, football and swimming were my life. Study wasn't my aim in life at that time. I got through school like I got through most educational things, as something that had to be done, rather than something I wanted to do. Where was home? I lived in Cremorne and later in Wollstonecraft. My mother came from a family which was quite wealthy. Her father was New South Wales Minister for Health and her uncle a Premier of New South Wales. My life, for the first 16 years, was in a family that was very supportive. It was a big family and we had a great life. My parents focused on family, education, and career. They were obviously professionally orientated. The thing that changed my life the most was when my mother died suddenly at the age of 42. This changed life for our family. It was not just the loss of a mother with a big young family. At that time, death duties were a big factor. My mother and father had organized their estate planning on the basis that my father would die first and all assets would be in my mother's name. The death duties effectively wiped out the family's wealth. All of a sudden we had little money and my father was on his own looking after a young family of 7 children. How old were the kids at the time? I was the eldest at 16 years old and the youngest was 1 or 2 years old. It changed my view of the world. It brought me back from a comfort zone, a pleasant life, to recognizing that life was limited and we had to get on with things. It changed my focus. Who was the dominant character in the family? Probably my mother, while she was alive. I still meet people today who talk about her doing things and how she was intellectually strong. She was a society type. Social balls and the charity scene were very much part of my parents' life. My father was a specialist physician. He was a great teacher. Many doctors, including myself and my brother, Tom, owe much of our medical skill to his teaching. He had an exceptional work ethic, always going the extra mile. The latter was needed after my mother's death. I had an inspirational family. Where did you go to university? I went to Sydney University and studied medicine. My parents said I had to get an education. I thought about being a vet and I thought about being a doctor. My father's influence probably swayed me to being a doctor. I met my wife, Belinda, at university. She was doing an arts degree. I married when I finished uni and then went to the Mater Hospital in North Sydney. It was a different hospital because it was designed to train general practitioners. That interested me in general practice and that's where I went after 3 years at the Mater. I set up practice in Manly Warringah. The problem I saw in being a specialist was that it was about who you knew instead of what you knew. It doesn't sound like you had a lot of ambition at the time. All the children in my family had a sense of doing their best in life. I reject the idea that being a GP wasn't ambitious. I didn't like the idea of being a specialist and I liked the idea of being a GP at that time. Some people would have thought, a GP, was a failed specialist, but that is not the way I saw it at all. The problem I saw in being a specialist was that it was about who you knew instead of what you knew. In other words, you got a hospital job depending on your connections, appointments and referrals. It was about who you were, not how good you were. That was not the way I wanted to be. I did not want to have to play golf with guys to get referrals. It is the principle. I would rather do my own thing and be responsible for it. I went into a group general practice. It was a partnership which continued my education in medicine and the economics of running a practice. It was a big group. The financial sheets I get for our medical centers today are an expansion of what we had in that practice. One of the partners in the practice did all the financials. He was also very interested in stocks and shares. I was fortunate he was there to learn from. I had always been interested in business and in the stock market. I remember the first IPO, initial public offering of shares in a company, we bought into. It was Goldfields. It just seemed like money from heaven. I might have made something like $800. With my salary of $24 a week, it was a lot of money. That whetted my appetite. The Poseidon boom developed and that kept me interested in the share market. I did a lot of trading. I did a lot of reading and charting. I was into options, margins and all sorts of things. It was an education. But the boom came and went. In the wash-up, I only made about $200. It taught me that trading is not a game I am good at. Did you enjoy practicing medicine and what was the driver for that? Was it the money or the caring aspect that came through? Caring is an integral part of medicine. If you do not care for patients, you will not be happy or last as a doctor. At the time I started in medicine, being a part of a medical family, I did not think I was going to make a lot of money. There was great satisfaction in practicing medicine as a GP. It takes a mixture of knowledge, experience and intuition. When you are in general practice you look after people sometimes for more than a decade. You see people in a different light, whether you like it or not, they become part of your life. You see their struggles, their joys, and their miseries. I was still seeing patients when we became a public company. In the end the board said I had to stop. I really miss patients. What you don't realize while you work as a GP is that patients give you a lot. They are inspiring. You see people who have disabilities or people who have kids with disabilities. You realize what you have and how fortunate you are. Medicine is pretty satisfying. Going back 20 or 30 years the GP was, much more than today, an integral part of the community. Was that important to you? My parents had that view. When I was younger, I reacted a bit against that. Life as a GP can be tough. Being a GP takes so much of your time, it takes away from your life with the family. Having said that, you and your family do become an integral part of the community. For us that was Manly Warringah. In retrospect, I took this for granted. Manly Warringah is where you started the business that we know today. Yes, in conjunction with our rural enterprise. I have always been interested in livestock, farming, and property improvement. My family was fully involved. We bought our first property in the early 1970s and my family would work on the property on weekends and holidays. We worked the two businesses, medical and farming, together, and as we have become more successful, both have grown. In part, they have also got me to where I am today. Most of your professional life you are paying school fees, taxes and living expenses. If, at the same time, you have a farm, it can be tough because droughts come. During the early 1980s a severe drought did come. I remember going through stages where we were paying something like $3,000 or $6,000 for a load of hay every week while my income was more like $6,000 every 2 months. The bank account was growing a huge deficit and it kept going on and on. Droughts are very educational, like a bear market. You realize that subsidizing farmers in droughts is not necessarily in their best interests. They are better to cut their losses, get out and come back later. Things got worse on the farm and the school fees kept coming. The banks were very accommodating, like all banks. They say, "How much money do you want?" And we understand, and then all of a sudden they say, "Oh dear, we want our money back now." Not only do we want the money back now, but your interest rates are also going up because you are a higher risk. At the end of the Howard era as treasurer, I was paying 23% on my loans. That was about a decade after we bought the first property. You always think the drought will end, and it will end, but it is a question of can you survive. Like the bear market, it does have an end. It's just a matter of everyone going broke in the interim. At that stage I was contemplating what to do. I decided to borrow offshore. Initially, I borrowed in Swiss francs because it was 1% money and not 23%. We went from cash flow negative to cash flow positive. I also borrowed more money offshore and put it into Australian government bonds. It was a cash and carry exercise. At that time, I had not heard the term. You would put in $20,000 and the banks would lend you $1 million borrowed from offshore and you would buy a $1 million worth of government bonds. The bonds were yielding 15 or 16%, and we were borrowing at 1%. I had met Pete Bonetto at Société Générale. I was anxious about the currency exposure. The Australian dollar going down could have been a disaster. I needed advice. He thought it best to swap from Swiss dollars to American dollar loans. We did that. Advice probably saved our bacon. Staying as we were could have been a disaster, as it was for many other people. It went well and I just kept at it. And as I made more money I kept putting more money in. I ended up with a very large amount of government bonds. Borrowing offshore was a gut-wrenching exercise and it taught me a lot about interest rates, currencies, politicians, reserve banks, and the nuances of how they work together. To this day I still get up at 3 a.m. and watch Wall Street on CNN because that is always what I used to do. When you are all geared you can see your whole equity disappear one night and reappear the next night. I was running a medical center, I was paying a mortgage, interest rates were around 18% and people were going bust everywhere. People were really angry with politicians and there was real unhappiness. I had great faith in Australia, a view that I have always held. Based on that view, I thought interest rates would come down, so I kept buying Commonwealth bonds. Keating's recession we had to have in 1990 was actually true because it changed the Australian economy. Eventually, rates did come down and the bonds went up. That gave me the cash to pay off my debts, increase the farming and, when it came along, we could get the medical center going. I was running a medical center, I was paying a mortgage, interest rates were around 18% and people were going bust everywhere. How did your first medical center come about? At the time, the landlord at Warringah Mall came to me and said we are going to knock the building down and you are going to have to move. He said there was a building going up next to the bus station in the corner of the car park. You can go over there. I thought about it and, at the time, I was fed up with the way medicine was going. I was thinking about retiring and just working on the farm. Specialists were taking over many activities that GPs used to do. It was getting to the point where GPs were just prescription writers. The satisfaction was diminishing. I liked the idea that as a GP you did everything, as I had learned in the Mater Hospital years earlier. I loved to work in casualty where you had to deal with just about anything. We also had an outpatient section where people would come in with things like earaches and sore throats. They would come in with their lunches and wait all day until you saw them. The Mater Hospital, had X-rays, physios, specialist clinics. They had everything that our medical centers have today. I liked that medicine and I knew there was a big demand for bulk billing and after-hours care. I had previously approached doctors about sharing after-hours and weekends. We would have cups of tea and go home without having resolved anything. I knew they didn't want to do it and I knew they didn't want to work weekends. The medical industry, were starting to destroy general practice as it was. The economics of general practice were being destroyed. Bulk billing had put a lid on the revenue side of a practice. There was a cost-price squeeze that had been going on for a long time. Given the opportunity at Warringah Mall and the changes in general practice, we set up a big medical clinic based on the outpatients model of the Mater Hospital. To set up the new clinic was fairly ambitious. The rent was $360,000 a year compared with $12,000 a year at my old clinic. While I had to make it viable financially, I did not go into the new center with the view of making a lot of money. My initial concern was, can I pay the rent? Basically the place just took off, the demand was incredible. I went to talk to one of the guys from Brookvale Clinic about joining us and 2 other doctors joined us part-time. Was this a sign you were a good salesman or a sign you were a good leader? I don't think of myself as a salesman. People say that I am, but I really don't think I am. If anything, I tend to over-explain the downside because I am more worried that they will come back and say that I didn't give them the full picture. I explain the downside as much as I explain the positives. What does the Warringah Medical Center earn today? The order of $1 million in EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. It has grown every year of its 20 years. It has done well despite starting on the wrong formula, because the more patients we saw the more we lost. Basically, we had the doctors on the wrong percentage, their cut of the billings. How many centers are there today? There are 40. Every one of them is profitable? Yes. Eventually. You worked out the formula for the medical centers to succeed? The formula has been refined. We have been very focused on cost extraction. I can't control the revenue, but I can control the costs. People ring up and say, I can get you more patients, and I say, I am not that interested, but if someone rings up and says, I can get you a test tube at 10% off, then we are interested. Can you tell us why you decided to open more centers after Warringah Mall? The medical center at Warringah was going well. I was dropping my kids in Chatswood to go to school in Riverview and I spotted a building that was owned by a developer that had gone bust. We leased the building. The family literally lumped the furniture around and set it up. That center went well. We started to do fairly well, and then I started to have a sense of how can we get out of this. There was a lot of negativity from the medical profession toward centers and corporate medicine, especially from the AMA, Australian Medical Association. The standard trick was vilification in one form or another, with a standard line describing centers as 6-minute medicine. I resented that because I enjoyed the medicine and it was good practice in its widest sense. That's surprising given you come across as someone who would enjoy a fight. I'll fight on principle, which is a very expensive problem I have. We bought a house at Bowral for a record price at the time. That purchase was then the source of a line from the AMA president in a newspaper that said, "A GP who practices proper medicine should not be able to afford a $3 million holiday house." I ended up suing the AMA, its president and the publication in the federal court and won the defamation case. The case made legal history. My son studied law and he laughed, "Dad, we had a lecture on your case today." That was quite a process to go through. You think you just go to court and it's no big deal, but it's a situation where your whole credibility is brought into focus. You go to your barristers and they say, "Have you got anything to hide? Tax, private life, anything at all? If you have, don't bother going ahead." On top of all that, they said that they, the court, are going to believe the president of the AMA. I said, "We are going to do it." How scared were you? Scared is the wrong word. I wasn't scared. I had faith the justice system would work. You start the process and you get worn out or financed out. You get fed up writing checks for the lawyers. You need to have the ability to persist. We won the day and more importantly we won the principle and we put the AMA back in its box. It allowed me to get on with what I was doing. I was no longer a free shot for the medical press. I ended up suing the AMA, its president and the publication in the federal court and won the defamation case. Having gone through that, the debts had increased again, with the rural properties getting bigger and better. The problem now was that times had changed and the banks, especially Westpac, Dr. Bateman's bank, were struggling. Kerry Packer had already made his infamous raid on the Westpac register and they were tightening their belts. Westpac wanted its money back. One day, 2 guys from Westpac arrived at my home. They were like policemen. They started talking and I was listening. I said, "You know, I'm paying all my interest payments, so what are you here for?" They said, "Yes, we understand, but the world has changed and the bank wants you to repay all the money." It sounds a bit like what is happening today. I can't remember the size of the loan. It might have been $8 million or $10 million, but it was like saying I had to repay $1 billion. They, the people from Westpac, said to sell the medical center and that would repay the debt. I got very irritable with those people. I abused them and they scurried out of the place, but that didn't get rid of the debt or the house. Compounding my irritation was the prior offshore loans and the fees that they, Westpac, were charging. Every 3 months there would be a rollover and new pricing of the loan. They were clipping me each time. They were apparently doing that to everyone with offshore loans. Subsequently, the bank came to me with a committee of lawyers and Westpac people. They said they wanted to clear up all the problems they were having with the offshore loans. They had the problem of a lot of people lining up to litigate against them. I wasn't one of them, but they felt the need to deal with me. Basically, they were asking that I make no claims and in return they would assist with future loans. After having said they would look after me, a year or so later the bank said they were going to sell my house or medical center to get their money back. That made me think you can't trust banks. I just told them where to go. The bank ended up not doing anything because I was doing what I was supposed to do. As a result, I started to look at how I would sell the medical centers. We found 4 groups who might be interested buyers. One was Advent, the venture capital company. Another was a group associated with Chris Corrigan, of Patrick Corporation. I said I liked the venture capital people. They spent a lot of time talking to me and their inquiry was intense. They would have seen me up to 20 times. They looked very hard at the financial numbers. They asked me if I was willing to have a public company structure. In the end they took up 20% of the company, which paid the company's debts. They put in cash to grow the company. I was looking to get out, not to grow the company. But they said, "This is a great model, why don't you do another one?" That was the 3rd center. The share market took off again. The economy had changed again. Advent was important. After the AMA saga, I thought whatever they do to me, I can survive it. From that point on, I wanted to be my own self, and I didn't want the world chasing me and sticking pins in me. If I can put up with that, I can put up with anything people throw at me, so I started to consider the public listing. Advent put in place the public company structure with formal financial reporting. You learned a lot from Advent? Absolutely. In every phase of the business I have been fortunate. When I was a GP I did it, set up the medical centers, myself, and when they, Advent, came along we went to another level and we became a public company. Advent put in the processes and a board and taught me how they work. They were concerned about whether I would be responsive to a board. I think they were very important. To this day Brian Ball from Advent is on the board of Primary. Primary's board and, in particular, the chairman, Greg Gardner, have been integral to the continued success and guidance for me and the company. Was it helpful that outside investors had the chance to have a good look at your business? Yes. The process was educational. It has helped me to expand, develop, and go forward. The IPO, the roadshow, and talking to investors was an educational process. While I was selling and explaining the business, investors were asking questions and, in turn, letting me learn what makes them think and how the market ticks. How would you describe yourself as a manager? I am still very much operational. Do you see yourself as a leader? I don't see myself as a leader. I would say I have done what I have done out of necessity. One of the things that has always annoyed me is that the market keeps saying, "It all depends on you." Analysts list major risks: the loss of Dr. Bateman. If I die and the share price drops, buy. To say it all depends on me is not correct. It is satisfying building something bigger and better. I believe medical centers are the way to go for healthcare delivery in Australia. It is what the patients need. It is better for the doctors. I believe in what we are doing. Primary healthcare is growing. How much of this growth is due to you and how much is it due to market forces pushing you in a certain direction? Are you still true to yourself? I think absolutely it is still me. If I hadn't have been here, the takeover of Symbion would not have happened. It was not an easy decision. We are a company with a solid model and pretty much endless growth, so why go and change the world? It was a decision that took quite a lot of time and mulling over. I believe that when the door opens you should go down that path. If opportunities come along, I take them. To an extent, that is what has happened the whole of my life. So there is no conflict within yourself about the decisions you make? I mull over decisions. Any serious decision I have made takes a long time. Some of the board said I had been talking about the Symbian takeover for 8 years. 8 years ago it was not a possibility. A year ago it wasn't a possibility. It's a matter of looking at the downside and doing the numbers. My wife said I have been doing the numbers all my life. The focus is always downside numbers, not upside numbers. I believe that when the door opens you should go down that path. If opportunities come along, I take them. When you look at the downside, that suggests an amount of fear. It is a fear of failure. So is fear of failure a big driver for you? I think so, but failure could be the wrong word. In a way, my family failed as they lost a birthright as a result of death duties at the time of my mother's death. When the drought came and interest rates went up, we should have walked away, but that was never contemplated. When I went into the offshore loan I talked to my wife and explained the risk and that we could go broke. Failure was a consideration. Is that still there for you, that underlying fear of disaster? My wife says I am a pessimist who does optimistic things. Yeah, fear of failure is a fairly powerful driving force. It is hard to define why it should bother me. Ironically, it hasn't changed. I am in a position where if primary blew up tomorrow, I would be fine. I have always, as I have got older, had the sense that I want to get another chance at running a business. You only get one chance. Fear of stumbling at the last roll of the dice is pretty powerful. It is probably getting too close to the bone. I think fear of failure is a fairly potent driver for me. What has been the biggest challenge you have faced in this business over the years? I think trying to convince people that what I am doing is the way to go. Doctors are inherently conservative. I think my being a doctor has been an important element in our success in this aspect. You're referring to your fight over the credibility of the company and its style of medicine? The battle against the vilification has been important. It has also had the effect of making sure we are better than better. This has worked to our benefit. Was there a particular decision that has made the company great today? The discussion with Westpac Bank made us list on the share market. The building at Warringah Mall required a decision. They were circumstantial in the context of life and general practice trends at the time. They were trigger points. What are the essential ingredients to making a business like this successful? I think it is a people business. What I look for in people is loyalty and honesty. I can't deal with someone if they are not telling the truth. I also see a strong work ethic as important. When people say the phrase lifestyle, I'm not sure what to think. I like having time off, but when they bring that up as the number one point it just says to me, what do these people think life is about? Outsiders looking at your website and annual report don't get much except the numbers. What is Primary Healthcare's culture? The company is based on discipline, work ethic and cost control. Do what you are doing, know what you are doing and don't move outside of that too much. Know what not to do, keep doing what you know to do and refine it. It's pretty simple. All are expected to work and if they don't work they don't last long. People here are good at what they do, they are honest in what they do and they are very diligent in what they do. We have some extremely good people. They are expected to do the best they can and they generally meet expectations. How would you describe your leadership style? My sons say, it's my way or the highway. I have moved on from that, though. How I led in the medical centers is a way to look at it. I basically did the work and showed people how to do the work. GPs who have worked with me learned how to be good doctors and how to work more efficiently. I still have doctors who work at Warringah Mall who worked with me. A doctor came to see me the other day who had worked with me 15 years ago. He described me as his mentor and he wants to come back and work with us. By example is a major way I lead, while always being honest, straight and loyal. I stick with people who stick with me. I try to educate as many as I can. A lot of the people in the company came up through the organization. We tend not to bring in people from outside. The people we have brought in from outside have been exceptional because they had to be exceptional to get in. Do you have a good gut feel about people? When you pick people, have they tended to work out? I interviewed a guy for a job to run one of our companies and James, my son, was with me. I talked to him and said, "How about $300,000 a year and the job is yours?" He said that was fine. We shook hands and away he went. James said, "What are you doing? You didn't do anything, you just talked to him for an hour." The guy has been tremendously successful. There are other people I get a sense I don't want to be there and I let it be. I need to know that I am going to be comfortable working with someone. How hard is it for you to get rid of people? I think it is fairly easy to get rid of poorly performing people. The biggest mistake is not getting rid of someone who should go. You tend to hang on to someone because he is doing a job and you can't find someone else to do it. That is a disaster. I find it difficult to get rid of people when they are good people and it is a redundancy situation. There is no joy in that, but it is better to confront the issue and deal with it than put it off. So confrontation is not hard for you? I don't see it as confrontation, but rather negotiation. From a financial point of view, how do you run the business? Are there key metrics that everyone has to abide by? The business has to be profitable within a reasonable time frame. The market will not wait a decade for an outcome. Sometimes you have to make a decision for a decade ahead, but you have to make those decisions in the context of satisfying the market. You can have short-term pain for long-term gain, as long as you explain it and as long as it is not an excuse for failing to deliver. I have always tried to be consistent. We try to avoid increasing expectations. Growing earnings per share is a key in the long run. You can have short-term pain for long-term gain, as long as you explain it and as long as it is not an excuse for failing to deliver. Who are the key stakeholders in the company and how do you rate them in terms of importance? I rate shareholders highly. What surprises me is their loyalty. They trust me and I have this sense of not wanting to let them down. Big institutions that have been there long term, that understand the business almost as well as I do, they give you feedback, while not telling you how to run the business. I am appreciative of those shareholders. I look down the list of shareholders and there are people I know and who really depend on me. Some have much of their life savings invested. That is pressure. I have never sat around thinking I will make money for the shareholders. I think about making the centers work for the doctors. I've always had a focus on patients from the view of a doctor. A good facility, open all the time, service for the patients, good medicine is a given. That is what I want. How important are ethics to the business? With people who say ethics I cringe. Often, people who talk about ethics are the most unethical. Ethics come from within, they are not from someone writing a code. It is integral to the person. A person who has integrity and is honest is the essence of what creates ethical behavior in life. What about community and social responsibility of the business? Primary has really had great social benefit for the Australian population. It has changed general practice substantially for the benefit of patients and doctors, particularly in areas that are relatively poor or very poor, or rural areas where they have few services. It transforms the care and service provision. It does not mean we are perfect, far from it. There will always be dreadful doctors and there will always be services that go wrong. We are what the general population of doctors are, but the service is so much better than would be the case otherwise. It is clearly of great benefit. The fact we get huge attendances at the centers indicates that the patients are accepting that as well. It has transformed the world from non-bulk billing to bulk billing, which makes healthcare accessible and affordable. I think that is a very important part of proper health care. I seriously think it has huge community benefit. The rationalization and consolidation of healthcare is vital to meet the needs of the population. The disasters you read in the press about hospitals are a result of failure to do what I am talking about it. What you have is some local fiefdom running a hospital with a budget. Really, they should have large hospitals, open 24 hours a day and operating 24 hours a day. Why would you have 3 hospitals closing at 8 p.m. and opening at 7 a.m. when you could have one large hospital with better facilities, better services, and better utilization? It is what needs to happen, but no one is forcing this. The government gets flack, the public relations manage it, establish a committee and we go on to the next disaster. The consolidation that is occurring is essential and should be driven from the top. It is being driven by us, by others and by economic realities. Are global warming and other environmental issues on your agenda? I am a flat world person. I think global warming is unproven and it will take 200 years for us to know whether it is true or not, and there is little I can do to change it. So it's a non-issue for you? We will adapt, but it is not a direct material issue for us due to the nature of our business. What happens to the business if you retire or die? If I drop dead today and the share price falls $1, it is a buying opportunity. The perception that I am the key to Primary is a misconception. Let us go forward 10 years and you are no longer in charge. What does the company look like and is it sustainable? I don't think anything lasts forever. That is sadly a fact. Building, destruction and evolution is the nature of economies, and to say you will be here forever is arrogant nonsense. What will happen in 10 or 15 years? I don't know the answer to that. I just focus on what I perceive is the way to go. Does that mean I seriously think Primary will disappear in 10 years? No, I don't. But I think it is arrogance to build a company as a monument to whatever you are doing. Everything changes and modifies. I think the model is maintainable and it is driven by economics and need of society as much as anything else. Symbion is a bigger form of the current model. At the same time, that is a risk. The bigger you get, the bigger the risk. Momentum is harder to keep going in a bigger model than it is in a smaller model. 25% compound growth is not going to keep going in 10 years' time. Having said that, I would have said the same 20 years ago. You always find new ways to do things bigger and better. When we listed, Warringah Mall was making $2 million and all the investors on the road show said, "Can all those other centers get up to that level?" And I said, no, maybe half that level. They said, can Warringa Mall grow? I said, I'm not sure it can do any better. Now the other centers, are all past the peak level of Warringa Mall. I think growth will continue, but it won't necessarily be in the same form. Life will adapt and we will adapt with it. That is the key, the door opens and you go through it. There will be other people who think differently and will take different opportunities. That is what I would want them to do. I don't want to focus on ancient history. What is the message you can give to up-and-coming, young business leaders? Dream and do it. Everything I have done I have dreamt of doing, and what surprises me is I got there. But when I say that, I sense I should not say it. On a personal level, do you feel successful because the world will say you are successful? The trappings of success are there, but I am more derisive of them than anything. A lot of the things I have are great assets. Things like expensive cars are a waste of money. I don't think that type of thing is success, I think that is crap, to be honest. I just have a sense that it has been a huge struggle more than success. I really don't think I will be successful until I am dead and it is still there. Dr. Bateman's interview delivered some powerful messages. Like many of the interviewees, he expresses a strong vision and belief in his company's business model. For Dr. Bateman, general medical practice had lost its way in Australia and he wanted to restore the profession to its former glory. While many will argue that he has only harmed the reputation of the GP, Dr. Bateman and his followers are of the firm belief that GPs are better off and practice a far superior form of medicine in the primary healthcare clinics than any other place in the country. From a financial point of view, this is very difficult to argue against, with the doctors and shareholders both enjoying better returns. Key qualities of good leaders such as Dr. Bateman include self-belief and courage. While Dr. Bateman faced many dire situations, both in his business dealings and on his farm, he managed to work his way out of these problems to emerge stronger and more determined. It seemed that each time he considered retiring or at least slowing down, he was inspired to stay on by a set of events that had the potential to undermine many of his achievements. Interestingly, while Dr. Bateman could be described by some, and even by himself, as a penny pincher and micromanager, he, like many other of the interviewees, firmly kept his sights on the big picture. He saw the advantage of running a 24-hour medical center and the benefits it delivered to the community, doctors and shareholders. He has never wavered from this belief and its core strategy to the business. Given this belief, it will be fascinating to see if he can incorporate the highly diversified Symbion model into primary healthcare's way of doing things. Dr. Bateman is fairly typical of those we interviewed who have started from scratch and built their own companies. These types of leaders have a tremendous resilience and ability to adapt to changing circumstances. They have a can-do attitude and believe there is always a solution to be found. It is interesting to note that while Dr. Bateman does have a big-picture mentality, he still enjoys being in the trenches, watching costs and other details. He strikes us as the type of leader who believes his way is the right way and seems to rely on himself to continuously deliver. After the interview, we felt that Primary was firmly a reflection of Dr. Bateman. Again, like many of the others in this book, he did not choose to be a leader and does not really regard himself as such. Finally, Dr. Bateman was extremely candid about his drivers in business. More so than any other person in the book, he discussed at length the role that fear of failure has had on his business life. He also revealed the impact the death of his mother has had on his attitude to life. Both of these are difficult subjects to discuss, and his openness is greatly appreciated. I've always had the view that you need to use a management style that works in a particular situation. At that time, David's was in the trenches and we didn't have any guns, rifles, or ammunition, and they were nuking us. There were 300 things to do but absolutely no time. So we narrowed it down to the 12 absolute essentials and concentrated on getting them done. Andrew Wrightseer Metcash is a wholesale group that supplies independent retailers in the grocery, liquor, and hospitality industries. The group's businesses include IGA, Campbell's Cash and Carry, and Australian liquor marketers. The company reported a net profit of $197 million in the 2007-08 financial year. Investors have received a return of 411% during Andrew Wrightseer's term as CEO, between 1998 and 2008, compared with a 227% increase in the All Ordinaries Accumulation Index. Chapter 3: People and Time. David to Goliath. Andrew Wrightseer. For the past decade, the faces of the suppliers have pretty much told the story. Sitting in the Metcash foyer at Silverwater waiting to see the company's management, they looked jittery and agitated, not unlike a group of naughty boys perched on the seat outside the headmaster's office, waiting for their punishment. Many of these suppliers clearly would have preferred to have been visiting the Silverwater jail next door rather than trying to sell their products at a decent price to the boys from South Africa. While the Metcash offices might have moved a few kilometers away to North Ryde, the uncompromising attitude and desire has stuck firm. At the head of the much-revered management team is Andrew Wrightseer. A tallish man with dark, thinning hair, Wrightseer has a strong South African accent and a laugh that could scare many adults, let alone small children. Wrightseer arrived in Australia in 1998 to run Australia's largest grocery wholesaler, David's Holdings, on behalf of Metro Cash and Carry. Metro, looking to expand its business into an English-speaking country, had started buying into the troubled David's before launching a takeover bid. Once Wrightseer and his team had arrived in their new country, they realized just how big a mistake the acquisition had been. David's was in a dismal state, on the verge of announcing a $240 million loss, and needed to be recapitalized in a hurry. Not one to be spooked by a dire situation, Wrightseer and his senior management team, Mike Jablonski and Edwin Jankelowitz, set about rebuilding David's with a heavy dose of crisis management. 10 years later, Metcash, formerly David's, is the third power in the $80 billion Australian grocery industry through its IGA stores. Under the leadership of Wrightseer, the company has become the dominant wholesaler and managed to claw considerable amounts of market share from the powerhouse duopoly of Woolworths and Coles. The company also successfully operates Campbell's Cash and Carry, and the country's largest independent liquor distribution business. The near-death experience at David's was stressful for Wrightseer, but it was the type of situation he had been training for even before he was born. His Jewish parents survived the Holocaust in Europe, fought for the State of Israel, and then moved to South Africa, a point as far away as possible on the map. Wrightseer grew up in South Africa, and to succeed in business you had to fight extremely hard. He spent many years working for his father in the family's glove factory before leaving to pursue his own goals. By the time he arrived in Australia in 1998, Wrightseer was ready to take on any task that was thrown at him. Once Metcash was saved, he went on the front foot and started plotting the purchase of his biggest rival, the Western Australian-based Foodland Group. After a long battle, Metcash eventually gobbled up Foodland to stand alone as the #1 wholesaler in the grocery industry, an outcome that would have seemed impossible only 5 years earlier. Throughout our interview, Wrightseer explains that adapting to Australian culture, both business and social, was almost as difficult as saving Davids from collapse. Many Australians have found dealing with the latest wave of South African immigrants to be difficult because of their blunt and abrupt nature. Wrightseer explains this perfectly, and in the decade here he has done a tremendous job of building a bridge between the two cultures. Now in his mid-50s, Wrightseer still burns with desire to expand Metcash. He sees the company growing by between 50 and 60% over the next 5 years. At the core of this desire is the simple belief that Metcash exists for the primary purpose of servicing and championing the cause of the independent retailer. We met Wrightseer at Metcash's modern headquarters in North Ryde. The building is modest for a top 100 company, but it is a significant improvement on the Silverwater premises the company had occupied for many years. While he may be an intimidating figure for suppliers, Wrightseer is charming and engaging in our interview. He talks openly about a range of topics, including the importance of leadership and how varying techniques are necessary in different situations. Wrightseer has managed to keep the hard-nosed approach he learned in his old country, but it is mixed with a relaxed Australian attitude. What was it like growing up in South Africa? All my formative years were in South Africa. My parents were survivors of the Second World War. My mother was in a concentration camp in Poland called Auschwitz, and my father was a Chetnik in Serbia. He fought the Nazi occupation and eventually ended up being sentenced to life in prison by the communists. In Serbia at the time there were people who were loyal to their king before the war, and when they were invaded by the Nazis there were two resistance armies, one who wanted the Nazis out so they could regain their kingdom and another who wanted the Nazis out so they could become a communist state led by Tito. My family background is one of survival, and it has definitely had an influence on me throughout my life. It's in my genes. My recollections of school are that I wasn't that bright, I was lazy and had to work hard to get through. Given the treacherous life they led, where did your parents meet? My mother lived in both Novi Sad and Budapest in Hungary. When the Germans invaded Hungary, she was taken by the Nazis. At the end of the war, they were liberated by the Americans and went back to Budapest to see if they could find anyone, which they couldn't. Jews were traveling around Europe, finding other displaced Jews to take them to what would become the new state of Israel. They picked up my mother from a refugee camp and put her on a ship to Israel. My father, because he fought for the Serbs, was sentenced to life in prison when the communists took over. Tito, who was the communist leader in Serbia, did not want to be a 100% communist, so he decided it would be better to mix a bit of communism and capitalism. To teach Tito a lesson, the Russians under Stalin cut off the supplies of petrol to Yugoslavia. The same Jewish organizations that had picked up my mother went to my father's prison and had him and others released by swapping them for petrol. So he ended up on the same ship as my mother going to Israel, where they got married. After being in Israel for 2 to 3 years, without being able to practice his profession as a glove manufacturer, he took a map of the world and looked for the furthest spot from trouble. The two furthest places were South Africa and Australia, and he thought he could remember having a distant relative in South Africa, so he went there. 10 years ago, when I came to Australia, I landed in the country he should have gone to in the first place. They went to South Africa, started a business and had 2 sons, me and my brother. The reason I tell you this story is that coming from that environment you are naturally a survivor. I went to school in Cape Town. The first time I had any concept of leadership was in the South African Army, where we had to do our compulsory national service. They put you into small units and you had to do what people said. That's really the first time I saw any type of real leadership. In the army, the only discussion among your mates was what you were going to do when you got out, and you were counting the days until then. At the time, I had my mind set on becoming an architect and I couldn't wait to get out. It seemed like a nice thing to do. You created structures and did something good for society. Unfortunately, I couldn't get into any universities that I applied for because my grades were not good enough. My dad had his glove manufacturing factory, and the tradition over many generations was that the family worked in the business. His dream was that his sons would join him. With many families, especially migrants, the emphasis tends to be on the kids getting an education and going to university. With my parents it was the opposite. So they weren't disappointed that you weren't going to university? No, my dad was happy. And I worked for him for 10 years in the factory. You learned a hell of a lot because he had a simple theory that you could not be a manager unless you could actually do the task. I was not allowed to manage anyone unless I could do the job better than them. The factory became a very small factory because the market was not there and we could not compete with imports. By then, I had done my education at night, part-time. I did a Bachelor of Commerce and an MBA, which took 8 years. I then joined Metro Cash and Carry, a major food wholesaler. I was not allowed to manage anyone unless I could do the job better than them. Was your parents' business successful? If you asked them, they would say they were very successful. I mean, my dad came to the country wearing the only clothes he owned. They were survivors and had lost every member of their respective families. My dad once did a chart of his family, and when it got to 48 direct relatives, he started crying. He had gone to a totally foreign country, had built a business and had 2 sons, and we lived life to the max. He never ever spoke again about what happened in the war. Was he a good mentor? No, I had better mentors. He was more a technician and a lousy manager. He was technically sound, but couldn't manage the business. In terms of mentors, in South Africa I had 3. Metro Cash and Carry, which is now a multi-billion-dollar company, was started by a guy delivering coal to Soweto on donkey carts. His name was Lionel Katz and he had the most unbelievable gut feel. No education, no schooling, he came to South Africa as a Lithuanian Jew, and it was amazing that with his gut instinct he was right every time. He was a great mentor on how to just go with your gut feel. And you learned that gut feel is an important thing? Absolutely vital. I had another mentor, Clive Weil, who was the CEO of Metro Cash and Carry for a time. What he taught me was how to manage people. You would go into a business review with one of the division heads. My job was to do all the analysis. Clive used to say, "These are the 5 things we need to get these guys to do," and when you walk out of the meetings they must have agreed to do all 5 things. You could spend the whole day with these managers and he would guide them, and by the end of the meeting they came to the conclusion to focus on the 5 things, and neither him, nor me, nor any other head office guy had told them to do anything. The other great mentor of mine is Nelson Mandela. Anyone who goes to jail for 27 years for his political beliefs and comes out without bitterness and is able to focus on the big picture is a great mentor. You include Nelson Mandela as a mentor, but you would not have spent much time with him. I've met him a few times, but someone can be a mentor and you never speak to them. What did you learn from him? Focus on the big picture. Don't let personal prejudices suck you into detail, just stick with the big picture. And this applies in business as well? Yes, and everyday life too, such as sport. We sometimes have a situation where one of our guys complains or moans about a certain supplier, for example, and when we look at the big picture the focus changes. It would have been difficult to know who Mandela was while growing up in South Africa. When he was released from jail, did you really connect with him? I think the trigger was that I put myself in his shoes. If someone had locked me up for my political beliefs, I would want to get even. However, he came out and he did not want to get even. From his first speech, he chose not to focus on the past but pulled out a clean piece of paper and said that we should focus on what's good for the country in the future. And I think that we were so close to a civil war, both sides were armed to the teeth, and we wondered why he wasn't bitter, and that creates the awareness where you listen to every word he says. When you arrived at David's back in 1998, it was quickly going broke. Was getting the company back from the brink the hardest challenge you have faced as a CEO? Yes. What was that period like and how did you motivate the staff? I think one of the things that worked against us was that the business was failing and we knew we had to get in quickly. Initially, our thinking was that we, Metro Cash and Carry, should buy 15% and ask for a seat on the board, and have a look-see. At the time, we were thinking that if it looks a bit scary we'll sell our 15%. After they put through 3 or 4 profit downgrades in a matter of months, our boss at Metro had to make a decision, and he decided that instead of backing out we were going to bid for the company. It was a big risk. The only information available to us was what was in the public domain. We could not get any other information. We could read the due diligence report written by the auditors, which was worth exactly 0. Once the takeover offer was complete, Metro eventually ended up with 72% of David's. When we arrived from South Africa, we worked out that David's was about 3 million times worse than we thought. It was a very interesting thing because food wholesale businesses are run similarly all over the world. As South Africans, we had a tremendous persecution complex, so we kept thinking, since we were isolated, that the world was going to run away from us. We traveled a lot to see what was happening globally, and we would come back thinking we, Metro, were okay. They might do a promotion differently or a share option scheme slightly differently, but overall we realized we were up there with them. At David's, though, we quickly found that all the things there were done differently from the way we ran our business and how many of the best operators around the world ran their businesses. Everything we touched and looked at was different. The structure, the systems, the accounting, everything was so different, except for the people. The people were great, and we realized we had absolutely brilliant people below the top layer of management. What the hell they were doing staying at the company, I don't know, they were so badly treated. It was then a question of fixing everything else, but at least we had good people. How did you get the staff motivated, given the whole terrible story was being played out virtually daily in the business pages? In terms of management style, you have 2 opposing views. One on the extreme right, where you have the dictator who doesn't ask anyone anything and tells people what to do. The other extreme is where you have someone who involves others and gets participation. I've always had the view that you need to use a management style that works in a particular situation. At that time, David's was in the trenches and we didn't have any guns, rifles, or ammunition, and they were nuking us. There were 300 things to do but absolutely no time. So we narrowed it down to the 12 absolutely essential items and concentrated on getting them done. People would say, "What about number 45 and number 73? And we would say that we did not have the time to get there, let us just do these 12 things first. We gave presentations to everyone saying we were just going to do the 12 things and anyone who didn't like it must go. I said we needed to do them quickly. I had not consulted anyone, had not spoken to anyone, it was just my ideas and I made up my mind after a week. I've always had the view that you need to use a management style that works in a particular situation. Did you discuss it with the board? No. Things were that urgent? Yes. Obviously I spoke to the chairman and he had been out here a few times. Other executives from South Africa had also been here and they had given me their opinions. I told the chairman these were the 12 things we would focus on and he just said, do it. That style in the early days has now become part of our culture. A few people left at the time, which was not great, but that's what had to be done. Was it because of your mentor, Lionel Katz, the founder of Metro Cash and Carry, that you went with your gut instinct and made decisions quickly, or were you not thinking about that at the time? I did not think of it in those terms. Someone once described the situation as, David's having, one foot in the grave and one foot on a banana peel, so you don't have a hell of a lot of time to think. It's very interesting because every year when we, senior management, get together we question whether we should go back to that management style. It was an autocratic style? Yes, that's right. Create emergencies. Not a bad idea. We say that as we go through cycles in the business we should ask the question of how we spend our money and time at a particular point during a cycle and then we'll get onto the path again. That was a key time in the history of the company. Can you remember one of the 12 points? The number one thing was to go with one brand in the food distribution business. We had 29 brands and we said we would cut it down to just one, called IGA. That was an unbelievably hard decision to make. One of the old brands was called Goodfellows. We had a retailer who looked like a good fellow who had a small store in a country town in Victoria. We gave a presentation in Melbourne saying how we would do this and how we would do that, and after the presentation he came up to me and said that his grandfather had founded Goodfellows and that he was known as the good fellow in town, so could we please explain what the hell IGA meant? We explained he wouldn't get the promotions, the deals, and the prices if he didn't change his name. If we were to make a similar decision today it would go backwards and forwards to the state board, the national board, the retailers, and so on, and we would make a decision over 18 months, by which time it would have been too late. The branding decision was a big one, as was changing the organization's structure. We made the conscious decision to push decision-making as far away from me as possible and as close to the customers as possible. We also needed to change the people management aspect and make them accountable and responsible, and in Australia that's really hard. We had to get people to understand that if a perfect KPI, key performance indicator, score was 10 and you got, then you failed, and we needed to understand that we failed and what we would do about it. But people would say was good and I tried my best. It's not my fault, these are the factors that stopped me getting 10 out of 10. In an Australian culture it's a very hard thing to tell them they still failed. In South Africa, is it hard to tell people they have failed? No, it's not. It's a 2-minute discussion in South Africa. The person feels ashamed and either he resigns or he gets you 10 next time. That brings in the element of fear. Is fear of failing a good way to manage? Sometimes. If you do it all the time, the person will break down crying and not perform at all, so it becomes counterproductive. You need to be clever enough to know when to use it and when not to. You must know the individual you are managing and the environment you're managing in. Do you think you've achieved that? I think that's part of the reason we're here now. How would you describe the culture at Metcash? Is there fear in the culture? No, I don't think there is fear in the culture. I think we have a very entrepreneurial culture. Speed is vital. People understand that civility and respect are the most important things, both internally and from us to the outside. People must be team players, take on personal responsibility and be accountable. It sounds like these are a set of values. Are these values stated and does everyone understand them and behave appropriately? Yes. Who developed the values? The leadership team 10 years ago. Are the staff measured by those values? Yes, it's half their performance review. Half is what you achieve and half is how you achieve it. How many direct reports do you have and what qualities do they have? I have 10. We live according to the same values, but they are all different people so they have different qualities. How do you handle conflict? Is it difficult to terminate someone's employment? The hardest part of this job is to send someone home. I always think about their family, but very often it's the best thing you can do to people. They sometimes phone me up and have a beer with me where they say it's the best thing I ever did for them. But it's still the hardest thing. I think of myself having to go home and say that I got fired. You have to be very careful how you do that. Conflict is good. Sometimes there is not enough conflict in the team, so I create it. Conflict is good. Sometimes there is not enough conflict in the team, so I create it. If we're all happy campers and yes men and all agree with each other, then we will not produce the result. Can you give a recent example of this? It must be constructive conflict and not where it's attacking a person. If we want to restructure a department, for example, and everyone agrees, then I intentionally go down a certain route that could create a healthy debate. So good, aggressive discussion. Does it get personal? Yes, everything is personal. That's the South African part we have to guard against. What effect does your South African upbringing have on doing business in Australia? You make a whole lot of mistakes. The greatest problem for South Africans coming to Australia is that on the outside it looks the same: the weather, the barbecues, the jokes and the sport. You think it's the same, but it's not. You end up insulting people and being misunderstood and making mistakes. You have to be very careful. As an example, in the early days manufacturers hated us. David's used to claim discounts more than it should have and hold back paying them. So when we took over, a lot of manufacturers were coming in and they had a list of issues or things they wanted us to do or not do. In our meetings with them, we would stand up to leave after about 5 minutes, believing the meeting had finished and the issues resolved. I could see the guys from the suppliers would be looking at their watches thinking, how can we only have a 5-minute meeting? In my mind, we had addressed what we were going to do. However, in Australian culture, we had not spoken about the weekend or the footy yet, and apparently the meeting should go for an hour. Do you think you were too abrupt for Australians? Extremely, and you make mistakes. I would go to meetings where we would want something and I would come out of the meeting and say to my team, we got the right outcome. My team would say to me, no, you didn't get it. And I'd say, they didn't say no, and my team said to me, they never will say no. Australians are far more polite and respectful. Mateship is a big thing. I found that they would ask you for more information and request more time to analyze. What I later understood was this was the polite way of saying no. They would say, "Hey, that's a good idea. Let me take it back to my committee and let me think about it." Once again, that meant no. In South Africa, the guys would say no and you knew exactly where you stood. Did you get any negative feedback from Australians? Yes, I upset a lot of people. Did people then get aggressive with you and not want to deal with you? No. They pass you messages, and people within our company would tell me I couldn't talk like that. So it was a big, personal learning experience? Yes. Going back to Metcash, once you got over the near-death experience, you decided to take the bold step and make a takeover bid for your biggest rival, Foodland. Are acquisitions difficult, especially when you have put all your stores under one brand? Growth through mergers and acquisitions is the single most dangerous way of growing. When you grow organically, it's your people and your culture. It might take you longer. Going through acquisitions is very difficult. You need to be very afraid and handle it with the utmost attention, checking everything 3 times. You also have a cultural fit, and people are the culture, so don't mess around changing the people. How do you know the people don't fit? Do you know that straight away? Take the Foodland example. It was an aggressive, hostile takeover. The pushing backwards and forwards took over 12 months and I wasn't allowed to speak to any of their customers or people. Eventually, when the deal was done, the CEO said he was leaving, but his direct reports had read about me in the papers and were very concerned and desperately wanted to speak with me. We set up meetings in a hotel where I could meet each person one-on-one, and I knew within the first 30 seconds of meeting them which ones would make it and which ones would not. How did you do that? I could feel it. It's my gut feel. You should do that when interviewing people. As they walk in, write a number from 1 to 10 on the top right-hand side of your notepad. How many survived? Only 1, but he has been moved to a different business unit. Did you know the Foodland culture prior to the acquisition? We did through many discussions with their customers who had come to see us. They knew what we were doing with IGA and Metcash on the eastern seaboard and how we handled independence. They came to see us many times and asked whether we wanted to open a business in Perth, and we pointed out that we would rather do that through an acquisition. What was the difference in cultures? They were determined to supply their independent retailers while also opening their own retail outlets and competing with them. We don't do that. They were not the champion of the independent retailers, and that's our first value. You don't compromise on that? No, never. Who are the key stakeholders in your company? Who is most important? There are 4 stakeholder groups in the company, but they are all important. If I had to rank them, number 1 would be the customer, number 2 would be our people, number 3 is the supplier, and number 4 is the shareholder. If you look after the first 3, the shareholder will benefit. At times, the investment marketplace would criticize you for lack of communication around results time while you were looking after your independence, many of whom became wealthy under your brand. Is this a fair criticism? It was definitely a fair criticism at 1 or 2 stages in our history. What you must understand is that while we thought we did it well, we heard from our shareholders that we did not, and we had to change. Also, we went from being a small company to a big company, and there was a massive learning curve in how we needed to communicate. The amount of disclosure was different as well. Fund managers started to come to see us and we were stunned at the questions they asked. It was a new day. Is it difficult to meet market expectations on profits each half year while trying to build a long-term, sustainable business? Not really. There is always pressure from certain shareholders to maximize short-term profits, but I believe in doing what's in the best interests of the company and looking after all stakeholders: the customer, staff, suppliers, and shareholders. Communication is key if they understand where you are going and how you plan to get there. That is the heart of Master CEO's Secrets of Australia's Leading CEOs. If it helped, a quick subscribe keeps more summaries coming. So how do people and time connect? That is exactly where we started. Go back to the top and watch it click into place.